Shalom, everyone, and those of you watching us on YouTube, we want to extend a greeting to you. Welcome you to the Covenant Calendar Club study this week. We hope that you'll be richly blessed from what you're about to receive and that you'll share it with those who you know and love. And we would like to go ahead and give you a warm welcome, just a loud shout out to you. Shall we?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello, shalom.
Shalom. Hello, everyone.
Blessings. Shalom.
Once again, we're so glad that you're here. But if you would, however, like to be with us when we're doing these recordings and join us in the discussions afterwards or on our Hangouts every other Friday, visit studythecalendar.com, and in the resource section, there'll be a place where you can join with us. We'd love to have you. With all that said, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight with Oh the Moon, Part 10. And Charlene, take it away.
Okay, we'll just share the screen here. And then we'll move the pictures away. There we go. I think we're ready, everybody. Are you ready? Okay.
Ready.
I think I made an announcement that there's 97 slides, and so just write down your slide numbers if you have any questions. So tonight, this is part number 10. And again, it's called The Moon, Oh the Moon. It's part number 10. It's going to be the final moon study in this session. And we have a question like we always do. And today the question is, how can we know for sure which no God takes priority with Yahuwah's people? And the title is going to be called, My People Have Forsaken Me for the Moon. And that's a great big clue right there. But anyway, this is going to be the wrap-up. But first of all, we want to kind of take a look at what are the lessons that we've learned so far. And what we've wanted to do is learn all of our lessons from the scriptures, the very best place to be learning them. Last week we talked about Judah, that Judah was the entity that was responsible for removing Yahuwah's covenant calendar keys, when actually Judah should have been paying attention to her job description of teaching all of the laws instead of changing many of them. So get rid of that. Anyway, we bind and rebuke the enemy for taking power over this PowerPoint tonight. But anyway, Judah was busy doing other things instead of giving the laws to the people. But Galilee, remember where Galilee was? Up in the area of Naphtali and Issachar and Zebulun and Asher. Galilee had the light for the calendar. We also found that out last week. Wonderful light. And of course, Yahusha, his major part of his ministry was up in Galilee, about 75% of his ministry, and they had the light. That's a very interesting study. So we'll have Tim back helping us tonight as Mr. Graduate. And our question tonight is, hey, Mr. Graduate, now that we know Judah is the most responsible for removing the calendar keys, are we going to find out which no God had the most sway over them?
Yes, we will find the evidence from the scripture records. Maybe that will be a surprise, or maybe some have figured it out already. Today, we have a variety of areas to investigate and many more questions to ponder. Never forget, these scriptures must provide the answers to every question. We'll begin with our usual review and then ponder some thoughts before the rest of the study.
Yes, we will do a review, and I know that there's some here tonight that have missed a couple studies, so this review is going back to Moon part number 5, and we also had some last week that were new for the very first time. So in Moon part number 5, we were talking about the Hebrew definition 2320. It is Kodesh in Hebrew, and we found that this had to come into alignment with Moses and Torah as Yahuwah's new Kodesh month, not Yahuwah's new moon month or man's agenda. There is a new moon month, but we're talking about Yahuwah's new Kodesh month. We also looked at some lexicon challenges in part 5. We examined 4 of them from Theologian's Hebrew Lexicon Study Tools. First one was Strong's, then we looked at Brown Driver Briggs, we looked at Gesenius, and we looked at the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. If you see TWOT, it's the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. And there is going to be quite a few quotes tonight from this particular source, so you need to keep your eyes open. But we actually looked at all of these for the definition of 2320 Kodesh. Strong's had a little bit, but it did kind of emphasize the moon and the new moon. When we looked at Brown Driver Briggs, it had a whole lot more to say. By the time we got to Gesenius, it was like, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to guess, maybe about 100 words. And when we got to Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, he had over 2,000 words to promote the new moon as the beginning of the new month. So the more that we looked at, the more challenges there were. I think it's really important to be careful who we're looking at for these studies. We took some counsel from Moses all the way back to 1450 BC, and this is about 2,500 years after creation. And we found that Moses' Torah instructions about calendar especially as well were for all the kings, it was for the prophets and the leaders, and that includes us today. So we are finding that all of the instructions need to come out of Torah, right from Moses. That's the foundation of everything. Then in part 6, we looked at the 20 new moon verses, and we found that every one of them was a non-Torah reference, and every one of them mistranslated Kodesh, or the 2320 number. They translated that Kodesh to say moon instead of month, and not one of those verses aligned with Torah instructions. That is an important study. So do look at that in part number 6. In moon part number 7, we decided to take a careful look at the 1611 King James translators to see what was going on. We were still investigating this 2320 Kodesh number, and we came across Isaiah 47:13. That was the red flag verse, and we found that their mistranslation was deliberate. It wasn't ignorant. Why? Because Isaiah 47:13 has the word Kodesh, and they could have mistranslated it to say moon, and the context would have not changed one little bit. They had every opportunity to put moon in there instead of month, but they didn't. They left month. They forgot about it, so they were not consistent. What we found was that they were just mistranslating the verses that basically had 3 bundles of new moons, Sabbath, and festivals. The other verses that didn't have the bundle, they didn't do anything with it. So I think this was a deliberate action. Then we looked at some Bible translations around this verse of Isaiah 47:13, deciding that maybe some other translations would say it a little bit differently, and sure enough it did. They were much, much clearer, had a much better interpretation for the context of Isaiah 47:13, which was Babylon and her moon worshiping and gazing at the stars and all the heavenly hosts. So the King James Version did not translate it as accurately as they could have. Then, in the same moon part 7, we went and looked at some Bible commentators, which is something we normally don't do. We like to do our studies from the scriptures first. And when we went to look at the Bible commentators and what they had to say about Isaiah 47:13, well, guess what? They gave the proper meaning and the proper history of Isaiah 47:13. And they agreed with the proper context. And they also said that the Hebrew should have been preserved a little bit better. So what that really meant was the King James didn't really say it like they could have. So there are some of those iffy spots in the King James that you need to check out. Then after that, we transferred from looking at the 2320 Kodesh in moon part number 8. We are now going to look at Tanakh history. This was kind of a switch over, and basically we wanted to know where this history started with of Yos people or just anybody in the scriptures. Where did they start getting involved with worship of no gods, and how did this all come about? So we started out looking from Adam to Noah, and I'm sure that the ones that saw this saw all of the charts that gave us a really good view. After we had looked at Adam to Noah, then we moved up to the time frame of the flood to Nimrod. And we found that Nimrod was worshipped as a no god. He was the first human that was worshipped as a no god. There were others that came along afterwards as well, but he was actually the first one. But it only happened after he died. That was not the case with Semiramis. She was worshipped as a goddess while she was yet alive, and she was worshipped as the moon goddess. And of course, the illegitimate son, Tammuz, or the false Messiah, was also worshipped as a sun god. We are continuing in part 8. Remember too that we were keeping all of the events in order of date. That was the secret to breaking open this study. After Nimrod, we went to Terah, who was Abraham's father. We wanted to see if there was any no gods involved there. They had lived in the area of Babylon. It was called Ur of the Chaldees. And there was a lot of no gods that were worshipped there. Of course, it all came down from Nimrod and Semiramis. But we also found out that Terah manufactured moon idols. We found out that the word images, the very images that Rachel stole, that the Hebrew is teraphim. We also found out that Laban, her father, when we looked up at his name, Laban, it connects to Labana, or the moon. So there's all kinds of indications here about moon idols and moon worship. And this was a family inheritance that was passed down from Terah to Laban, and Rachel stole those idols. Remember that Jacob found them and he hid them under a tree. Anyway, you need to remember that too. Then we went further. We looked at Egypt and the no gods. Of course, there was a lot of no gods that were worshipped down in Egypt, while Yahuwah's people were in bondage there for many, many years. And we also found out that Mount Sinai, the 11th campsite, number 11, links to moon worship. And Mount Sinai was located right in moon worship territory. And isn't it interesting? That's exactly where the golden calf was built. And what else did we remember? That the golden calf is gone. That represents Nimrod and Tammuz as the sun god, but the altar that held the moon god is representative of the moon goddess, and that is still standing today. Big clue. We also moved up to look at Joshua and the no gods that he had to deal with. Joshua picked up his battle after Moses had passed away. And he was actually, I think, a priest under training with Moses in a big, big way. And his mandate was to clear the land of idols. And just before he died, in the very last chapter of his book, chapter 24, he pleads with the people to follow Yahuwah and put away the gods of their fathers. Well, who were their fathers? Terah and Laban. Not Abraham. We did not find any indication that Abraham was involved with the worship of any no gods. I believe that's why he was called out of Haran and down into the land of Canaan. Then we went on to talk about no gods and who were the two main no gods, because today if you go and do a search on the internet, you'll find thousands of them are worshipped around the world today. And especially for the ancient civilizations, they had a new god for every day on their calendar when it was a 360-day calendar. But we made the assumption to start out, would the two no gods be the sun god and the moon goddess? Or would there be other gods that would take their place instead? And we decided that the two main no gods must be the sun god and moon god that are contending for everybody's worship. And I believe that is still the same today. The next, we looked at groves and a garden. The groves and the trees were specifically designed for the worship of the moon goddess, and the worship of a no god began with a tree in the Garden of Eden. I believe that's exactly why Yahushua said, do not worship in the high groves and the places, these high places and groves. It was all about moon goddess worship. What happened at the tree of knowledge and good and evil in the Garden of Eden? That was where Lucifer or Satan took worship from Adam and Eve. Also in part 8, we continued our study with Judges to 700 BC, and right on the heels of Joshua's excellent leadership, when we get into the book of Judges, and I think it was about 2 years after Joshua had passed away, we find Judges is documenting very serious worship of no gods, and of course they would have been using pagan calendars. I do not believe that Yahuwah would have accepted their worship of on his calendar of a no god, but that was interesting as well. Then we had a part 8 conclusion, and we decided that the study is best if you put everything in order of date so that you can see exactly what is happening and you will see the biblical patterns. That is very important, to keep things in order of date. Moving on to Moon part number 9, this was the last study that we did. We are now looking at Judah information. We are going to continue our study from 700 BC forward. And the first piece of Judah information was a short section with some general foundational information on Brother Judah and the tribe of Judah and how it had connections to Benjamin and Simeon. Those three were together, and we discovered that Judah was surety for Benjamin and Simeon to his father Jacob way back at Egypt when Simeon was in prison. So do look at part number 9 to find that history. Then we went on and did a little bit on the sundial introduction. We're sort of using the date 701 to 699 BC. This is approximates right now, but probably close approximates. And we found that Hezekiah was given 2 signs for a very huge turning point in history. And asking for the sun to go back, was it the right choice? Absolutely, it was the right choice. If he had asked for the sun to move forward approximately 10 degrees, it would have actually put the year length around 354 days, approximately what the moon is doing now 12 times a year. So he did make the right choice, and I'm thankful for that. And I also believe if he would have made the other choice, we probably would have never figured out this calendar. We looked at some historical records by Velikovsky and Wong, who document a lot of calendar history with 30 ancient civilizations around the time of 700 BC, when this year length changed from 360 days per year to something else. And they tell us that it took these ancient civilizations about 50 to 75 years to figure out what happened to the calendar. I have a feeling it didn't just go to 365 and a quarter days the very next equinox. It probably yo-yoed there a little bit and took some time to settle down. But very interesting records how all of 30 ancient civilizations, and they name them, how they all had a year of 360 days per year. And the extra days, these civilizations, they just tacked them on the end of the 360. They didn't put them in between and months 3, 6, 9, and 12. They just added them on at the end. And of course, Hezekiah first. Hezekiah and Nehemiah, we did that history as well from 700 to 400 BC, where this sundial miracle, I believe it was a deliberate attempt from Yahuwah to move his people back to his ways of worship, to get away from that moon and to worship according to what he asked them to do, to just count out their months. And Nehemiah was the last great reformer, and he still was dealing with a lot of apostasy as well. Then we did a little bit of work on Judah information part 2, and this is about the New Testament era, where we had a little bit of information on the tribe of Judah in the New Testament, about Judas the betrayer, which is a Greek name for Judah, and we talked about the non-Jews as well and found some really interesting things there about what happened with calendar. We were on our search to see who removed the calendar keys. That's why we're doing all this work on Judah. Well, we also had to do some work on Naphtali and Galilee, which were north of Judah, actually north of Samaria as well. And when we did that investigation, we found out that Yahuwah was up there. That was where his stomping grounds were, and that he was teaching all of the truths in Scripture, and it would have included calendar truth as well. We also looked at the scripture that said Judah is the lawgiver, and we found out it doesn't quite mean that. Judah is not the lawgiver. It is Yahusha that's the lawgiver, but Judah was the one that was responsible to teach the law, but she didn't do it. Then we looked at Jerusalem and Pella. This is around 70 AD, and we looked at a little bit of material about 100 years after, including Paul and the apostles. They were known as Nazareans, and how all of them honored the covenant Torah, including the calendar. But after the destruction of Jerusalem, people that wanted to enter Jerusalem under Marcus, I think it was a Gentile bishop, he said, you cannot enter Jerusalem unless you renounce Moses and the Torah. So Paul and the apostles fled up into Pella, that was near Galilee, across the Jordan, and many of them settled there, and they were known as the Nazareans. Very interesting history. And then we had some audience participation, and we pondered on thoughts on how the covenant calendar keys were lost and by whom. Of course, all fingers were pointing to Judah. Judah was responsible to teach these laws and to save them and to guard them. But the Old Testament history clarified beyond any doubt that Judah was responsible for always wandering away from Yahuwah as well. And that was where all the troubles originated, because after they came back from Babylon in 538 BC, they were right back to doing what they were doing before. So tonight we are going to map some topics for the lunar conclusion. I'll just go through kind of what you can expect tonight. We are going to do just a tiny bit on Egyptian history. It is interesting. I'd just like to say for these, next couple of parts, we could probably do 100 to 300 PowerPoint slides on each one. You might get 2 slides tonight, or maybe 5 sentences. But Egypt has some really good history. But always remember, Joseph was next to Pharaoh many years, and Moses gained a lot of knowledge while he was in Egypt. We will just do a little tiny bit on Babylonian history, just to compare with what was happening with the Jewish culture and the economy. We've done all the Judah work already, so it'll just be sort of a little connection. Not very much tonight. Somebody else can do all of the Babylonian history for us next year. Okay, we will do a couple of slides on Jewish history, just a few, and what festival is attached to the new moon. You all know that, I think. And what calendar did the Jews adopt? And how was that calendar refined? And what key was removed? We're going to look at a little bit of that tonight. Then we are going to talk Talmud. There's going to be Talmud historical quotes and misquotes. We're going to compare these quotes to Moses and the Torah and see how they align with Yahuwah's covenant calendar. Now, I did ask for some readers to read some slides tonight that are going to have these quotes and misquotes, and most of them are misquotes, by the way. And I did say to the readers that they could give comment, but I will have some comments as well. Whatever comments that you have, it will be towards the new moon starting the new month, not a bunny trail, okay? So if you have something quickly you want to add to it, or we can wait until our discussion at the end of the PowerPoint. And we're also going to look at some Bible dictionaries just to see what man's commentaries and lexicons have to say. Maybe there's some help there. And what will they say about the moon? Will they say that the moon does indeed start the month, or what? Let's just have a look at a few of the Bible dictionaries. The moon in question. Oh yes, it's going to be time to ask some questions based on all the previous research and logic. We're going to be asking some questions about the moon. Save that. Then we're going to do just a little review of the Old Testament moon that we have done, just because there's probably new people here tonight, and I think we have about 3 slides, just a review of that Old Testament moon, and just to see what we're going to face when these questions come up again. Everything is from the roots of paganized calendars. But Christianity is becoming very close to some of these pagan root systems. So we want to look at those 3 review slides. Then we will look at paganized Christians. Just one slide. Yahuwah longs for Christian churches to be in covenant with him. And the question is today, what no gods are most denominations attached to? And within Christianity, there's nearly 40,000 denominations, and every one of them is attached to at least one no God. We're going to look at those. Well, our whole main focus the other time was which no God takes priority. We decided out of the sun god and moon god, one has to take priority. Which one is it going to be? And maybe you have already figured it out. We'll have a little bit of audience participation. If we have time tonight, we will do it on the recording. If not, we will save it till after the PowerPoint is done. But these are going to be the questions. What are the no gods hidden in most feast calendars today? And what are your thoughts on the no God that takes priority in the Old Testament and it takes priority today? You're going to find out really soon who the no God is that is priority. What about your accusers? You've been learning so much about calendar, and I know as we have been sharing, Tim and I and some of the rest of the Covenant Calendar people, trying to share everything that they've learned that is so wonderful with other feast keepers and their calendars that usually include a sunset and a moon month. We come across some accusations, and sometimes it's just not really very much fun. But what are we going to do to answer our accusers? Because they really do deserve an answer, and these questions will come. We need to know how to answer them in a loving way, and we need to have our scriptures. And then what's next? Well, this is going to conclude our moon study, I said, but it probably is never ever closed. There's much more that could be given, but this will conclude it for right now. But there is an upcoming presentation that's going to come in the new year that will also touch a little bit on the moon, a little bit, but it's about a calendar commencement issue, so we will show you a little bit tonight about what's coming, and that will be given by Tim. Okay, so here we go. Let's get started. There are some points to ponder and some questions of wonder, and I have this slide at the end. We're going to go over this again at the end because I want you to formalize what the answers would be to these thoughts and questions. Sun and moon worship received a solid foothold with Nimrod and Semiramis after the flood. And between Adam to Noah, there is no scriptural record against the patriarchs for worshiping the sun or moon gods. There is nothing written down in the scriptures. There might be something written in another book somewhere, but we are going exactly by scriptures. And we know that when any of Yah's people made mistakes, they were recorded. So we didn't find any patriarchs from Adam to Noah that were outright worshiping the sun or the moon gods. Of all the pagan gods, the sun god and the moon goddess represent the major no gods in sacred history. If the sun god and the moon goddess are the dominant pagan gods, which one of the two takes the #1 position? And we've given many clues for that already. Now listen to this. If sacred regard and or allegiance of any kind is given to the sun and the moon for any reason, is that classed as worship? We actually talked about that, I think, in the very first presentation. Number 6, if the sighting of the sun and the moon are part of the worship calendar, is that action regarded as worship? And number 7, will the covenant calendar study be able to conclude which is more deceptive, the worship of the sun god or the worship of the moon goddess? Now that might seem like an unusual question, but I want you to think about it. Is there one of these, out of the sun god and the moon goddess, is there one that is more deceptive? Okay, so now that we know exactly who is responsible for removing the covenant calendar keys, and we decided that was Judah from the scriptures, we are ready to address the very next most important question. Which no god will gain the authority of the calendar? Will it be the sun god, or is it going to be the moon goddess? And Semiramis is the one that represents the moon goddess very, very highly in the Old Testament. Well, shall we expose the answer right up front so everyone can follow the problem? Yes, I will. It's the moon goddess that takes #1 priority. And the reason that I'm telling you this right up front is so that when you go through these slides tonight, you will be able to see what is actually happening. We will bring up these slides again at the end, and you can decide if the moon goddess takes priority. As the Old Testament closes on the last 1,500 years of history for Israel and Judah, it is such a sad commentary to find them very unrepentant, continuing even faster on their path of abomination, adopting the worship practices of the pagans. When we read Malachi chapter 2, take a little bit of time if you haven't read it. That is the very last report of what was happening with Judah. It was abomination of their worship. That was the last piece of history. And this history is a pattern of what we should not be doing and where we should not be going. And as Yahuwah's calendar is being restored, and we believe it is with covenant calendar, he will and he can be worshipped on his terms, not pagan terms. So the next piece of our investigation tonight will be a very specific study on some secular historical information of the moon. Now, while we've been doing our studies over the years, we've been studying from Scripture first, and when we started actually sharing some things on the moon, and I'm going to say this is back in 2015, around in there somewhere, the questions that came to me were, well, where's the secular history? We want to see where the historical documents are. Well, we hadn't gotten that far, but we have them now, and there's lots of them. I just chose a few tonight. So the question is, can the moon command or deserve any sacred regard? Does it really get to have that much clout? Will this study reveal if we are dealing with a lunar deception, which is bad enough, and or a lunatic authority? We'll find out tonight. Yes, we are going to be exposing more on the moon in this study, especially through some Egyptian and Babylonian history. We're going to look at some Talmud information, and we're going to look at those Bible dictionaries and commentaries to see what is really out there and compare it to the scriptures. So let's start with the Egyptian and Babylonian history of moon worship. This is just a very, very short piece here. But have you ever wondered about the roots of moon worship? No wonder Yahweh said not to give sacred regard to the moon. We've done a lot of work on this already in the first 9 presentations. Egyptian calendar history. First of all, I would like to mention that around 1500 BC, when Moses was in Egypt and getting ready to take the people out, in Acts 7:22, it records for us, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And how many times I have read that and didn't realize that that quote or that verse is actually connected to calendar too. Because one of the things that the Egyptians do very well is tracking the equinox. That means that Moses would have definitely known how to track an equinox. And what does that mean? Around the 7th century BC, Egypt's 360-year day calendar that was in use for thousands of years was challenged by the sundial event. Priests were assigned the duty of sighting the new moon for the month start, a practice that was also observed by Babylon and the Hebrews. They were doing it too. Egypt had already mastered the art of constructing pyramids to accurately track the yearly equinox. And if you want a good study, that is one. We have a French study. Fawzi in France has done a study on the equinox, and he's put it into English. I do want you to see that next year. It's very, very interesting. Okay, so I think Tim is going to help us out with slide 24.
I just want to comment on that when Moses was learning all things of Egypt. And I've heard through the years so many times when people say, oh, that's Egyptian. That's Egyptian. Don't want anything to do with that. Well, if being Egyptian is so bad, or the information from Egypt is so bad, I always ask them and I question, why did Yahuwah have Moshe trained in everything Egyptian if it was all bad? And I don't think it was. I think we have an awful lot to learn about the Egyptian way of life. And I think we can apply that to our way today. Okay, this slide here. The Egyptian day and month start. The Egyptians began each new day with sunrise. Their month began with the disappearance of the old moon just before dawn. Note, the Mul-Apin tablets prove they were on a firm 30-day month. Now this is very interesting, and anybody can look this up on the internet. Just look up the Mul-Apin tablets. And it records that there's certain celestial identities that appeared on the exact same day every year. Very constant. It did not change. They also record 30-day months. Now, this is an extreme problem for the Enoch calendar because the Enoch calendar cannot duplicate that. Well, of course, the lunar calendar can't even come close. But the Mul-Apin tablets prove a 30-day month and a 360-day year very, very clearly. Their civil calendar was 360 days with an additional 5 days grouped together at the end of the year. The lunar calendar followed the moon cycles to regulate their religious affairs. The lunar calendar, through humanly designed manipulation, also corresponded with the seasons. Now, for an example, if you go to the lunar calendar that Islam uses, it does not stick with the seasons. It is totally changes, goes totally out of the seasons because they do not manipulate it. They stick solidly with the cycles of the moon. But with the human-designed manipulation, that's how the Jewish calendar keeps it corresponding with the seasons somewhat regularly.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I just would like to add too, Joseph was down in Egypt, and that was all a very divine plan. Joseph taught a lot of calendar, I'm sure, in Egypt, and there was a reason. There's a lot of things about Egypt. That's great, Tim. So we're just going to look at a little bit of Babylonian calendar history. Oh, friends, I just wish we would have had time to break this open, but I think you're going to get one slide here. But around 2300 BC, Sumerians had a calendar that divided the year into 30-day months, and they had 360 days per year. Also, I'd like you to note 2300 BC. That is an interesting number because we have a 2300 year timeline in Daniel 8. I have found 2300s in quite a few places, so that's a very interesting number. In Babylon, the months began at the first visibility of the new moon. And Isaiah 47, there's that verse, Isaiah 47:13 certainly links up with that. In time, Babylon designed a calendar fitting the luni-solar cycle over 19 years with 7 yearly intercalations of a 13th month. That means that 7 times within 19 years, they had a year with 13 months instead of 12. And of course, the Jews have adopted that calendar and they still use it today, and many feast calendars. Any calendar that's using the moon month is doing the same thing. In Babylon, the months were truly lunar, and the new moon day began at sunset when the new moon was first visible. And I don't know of any feast calendar that uses the moon that doesn't follow this same program. A little tiny bit of Jewish history of moon worship because we've done so much already. But the first day of the 7th month This is a really important phrase within Messianic Jews or any moon calendar. Is the above picture a familiar sighting to you? You know, many watch for the crescent moon so they can establish the first day of the 7th month, and they call that the Feast of Trumpets. And this is something that we used to follow as well. A little bit more on the Jewish calendar before we move on to Tim on the next slide. Prior to Hezekiah, the keeping of the lunar calendar was simple, as each lunar month had 30 days for 12 months, matching the solar year timing. And I do believe that the Jews were following that month. There's a lot of evidence there. But from 587 BC AD, the Jewish civil year was Babylonian, adding in a 13th intercalated month, a system that was straight out of Babylon. Later on, around 432 BC, Netan, who was a Greek, he took this calendar, he detailed it, and he refined it. It's called the Metonic cycle, and this is also accepted by the Jews. The commencement of the month was always determined by the observation of the crescent new moon. Remember, this is not the way Yahuwah designed it. After Nehemiah and Malachi, many feel that the Jews were no longer worshiping the sun and the moon gods outright. That is what they feel, that when they came back from Babylon, they weren't worshiping these other gods anymore. Well, that's what I thought too. But what did they do with these pagan gods? Did they really toss them out? We're going to find out.
Jewish calendar history. Jewish calendar is luni-solar. By 200 AD, visual observation of the moon was supplanted by secret astronomical calculation. I want you to look at that word supplanted. What does supplanted mean? That means to be replaced. The visual observation of the moon was replaced by concealed astronomical calculation. Who did that and why? When something is concealed, there's a secret agenda behind it. Much was determined according to the Talmud. The luni-solar calendar and its Metonic cycle forms the basis for the computation of the date of Passover each year in combination with Hillel's calendar of 359 AD. Remember, under Constantine, as the Roman religious persecutions continued, Hillel decided to provide an authorized calendar for all time to come, though by doing so he severed the ties which united the Jews of the diaspora to their mother country and to the patriarchate. Jews were then able to calculate the calendar and festival times themselves. And the question I have right here is, why were they calculating the calendar and festival times themselves? Why could not they look back to the Torah and use Yahuwah's instructions? Why did they have to calculate it themselves? And why did Hillel have to design it so that they could calculate it themselves? It's a total mathematical computation calendar, not the way Yahuwah intended. The Jews could no longer find their calendar between Genesis 1 to Exodus 24:11. It just does not exist there. The effects of a luni-solar calendar. When the Jews opted out of allegiance to the Tekufa, another major effect redesigned their calendar. In other words, the calendar was redesigned by giving it a lunar format. By default of a lunar format, the recipient of this worship from man was automatically redesignated from Yahuwah to Satan. Yahuwah was not able to receive worship from a lunar-based calendar. And Satan designed it that way so that he could be the recipient of the worship. If we go to Isaiah 14, verses 13, Yahuwah said that, or I mean, Satan said that he would control the Moedim. How did he do it? With the lunar-based calendar. He removed our man's worship from Yahuwah and usurped it to himself. Is this another key that is lost?
Yes, lots of keys. Well, who muddled with the divine calendar? Everybody that's been following the studies so far should know the answer. The answer is the very ones who were to preserve it. It was Judah. Yes, Israel and the 10 tribes up north, they were having problems too, but Judah was the most responsible because she was supposed to be the one that was preserving the laws and teaching the laws to the people, and she actually ruined them. Very, very sad history. So let's talk Talmud. The Talmud has no authority over the scriptures, not then and not today. And who's responsible for upholding the moon? We're going to be reading quite a few quotes from the rabbis under the given websites. And I want you to take notice that starting the month with the sighting of the moon has no scriptural authority. It's going to be our very first slide. So as we go through these quotes, just take note of who is responsible for upholding the moon to be in charge of the month. Okay, Tim?
We have zero scriptural permission. Consider this website quote. And this is pretty solid. It blows me away, this quote. There is zero scriptural evidence for sighting new moons to determine the beginning of new months. It is based 100% on teachings within the Talmud. If that doesn't have an effect on your thoughts, I do not know what will.
But maybe Talmud is okay. Maybe Talmud teaches just what Scripture does, Tim, because some people I don't think really know what the Talmud is all about, but that is something to research as well. Well, let's go on to slide 33, and Walter is going to help us with this slide.
Okay, quotes for month commencement. Number 1, and this is taken from the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, Volume 1, page 266. The new moon began when the thin crescent of the new moon was first visible at sunset. The next statement is taken from the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, Volume 4, page 639. The ancient or pagan Greeks recognized the visible new moon as the beginning of the month when they celebrated the sickle of the new moon with offerings and meals. This was also the case with the ancient Babylonians, who worshipped the new moon as the goddess Isis and had her wearing horns which resembled the new moon.
Yes, and when we actually looked at Kodesh, 2320 Kodesh, it was the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament that is the reference that had the 2,000 words that said that the new moon brought in the new month. So these quotes from this here TWAT, Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, we need to watch what they have to say. Okay, Vivian's going to help us with slide 34. Vivian, are you there?
Sorry, I was
Okay.
reading away here. Quotes for month commencement. 3. The ancient Jewish calendar depended not on mathematical calculations and arrangements, but was set from month to month according to the physical appearance of the new moon. And that is from the Pharisees by Lou Finkelstein, page 601, Jewish Publication Society, 1938, Philadelphia, based on Talmudic literature.
Yes, Talmudic literature on that one.
And number 4, in Old Israel, the new moon, the day after the crescent was first sighted in the sky, was celebrated by sacrifices and feasting. And that's from Judaism by George Foot Moore, professor of the history of religion, Harvard, volume 2, page 22, based on Talmudic literature.
Yes, so we have 2 there. We're finding that there's a lot of interesting information that's coming from Talmud literature. Okay, Mario, if you've got your mic open, we'll have you do slide 35.
As soon as it comes up here.
Yeah.
3, quotes for month commencement. The Rosh Chodesh is the Hebrew term meaning the beginning of the month, applied to the religious holidays observed in connection with the appearance of the new moon. That is, the beginning of each new month of the Jewish Hebrew calendar. The Jewish Encyclopedia, page 409, Berman House Publishers, 1976. They too refer to the Talmudic literature. Number 6. It's coming. Come on. Philo, the Jewish historian and contemporary of Yahushua Messiah, the apostle, says that Moses established the moon of the vernal equinox as the first month of the year. This is from the works of Philo on the life of Moses, chapter 40, part 222 and 224. Josephus, or Joseph, the Jewish historian, also confirms that, and defines it as when the sun was in Aries. Josephus, Antiquities 3.20. We can read that down there. Questions were, is the scripture for these claims in the Torah? All of this Jewish combination and admonition in the purest form. Did I read that right?
Yes, you did a very good job, Mario. Everything around the moon and the vernal equinox, we're finding new moon everywhere, and Talmudic literature. This is where these are all coming from. Okay, Walter is going to help us with slide 36.
Okay, number 4, specific quotes from Talmud 7. In the times of the Second Temple, it appears from the Mishnah that the priests had a court to which witnesses came and reported. This function was afterward taken over by the civil court. Well, the next one I'm going to read as I read it in German, okay? C.B. Zuckermann, Materialien zur Entwicklung der altjüdischen Zeitrechnung im Talmud. Now you want to know what it means, right? It's materials for the development of the old Jewish calendar in the Talmud. And it's very interesting because I saw the city there, Breslau, written in 1882, and before World War II, my parents, we lived close to that city before we had to escape.
That is interesting.
Okay. Continuing on, the fixing of the lengths of the months and the intercalation of months was the prerogative of the Sanhedrin, at whose head there was a patriarch. The entire Sanhedrin was not called upon to act in this matter, the decision being left to a special court of 3. The Sanhedrin met on the 29th of each month to await the report of the witnesses.
Walter, can you read that German part again and tell us again what it means in English?
Okay, it says C.B. Zuckermann, that's the name. Materialien zur Entwicklung der altjüdischen Zeitrechnung im Talmud. That's German, right? And it means materials for the development of the old Jewish calendar in the Talmud.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a source.
Yes, and I was going to read this. Tim was going to read this one, so go ahead, Tim.
Jewish quotes. On the evening before the announcement of the intercalation, the patriarch assembled certain scholars who assisted in the decision. It was then announced to the various Jewish communities by letters. To this epistle was added the reason for the intercalation. A copy of such a letter of Rabban Gamaliel is preserved in the Talmud. In the Mishnah, the book containing the late 2nd century record of Jewish legal rulings and other religious records, we find recorded that the Jews' religious leaders established rigorous protocols and rituals for determining when the new moon had been sighted. I'm going to read that statement again. We find recorded that the Jews' religious leaders established rigorous protocols and rituals for determining when the new moon had been sighted. So what happened just to the visual scene of the moon? What happened? Why did all these rigorous protocols and rituals, why did they have to be put into the system? What did they do? What did they change? And the question again, where is the scripture for these claims in the Torah? Does it exist?
Mm-hmm. Tim, could you tell us a little bit about the Mishnah? There might be some people that don't know what the Mishnah is.
The Mishnah is an oral tradition. It's when the scribes got together and they discussed matters, and it just was handed down mouth to mouth. And their theory that they decided in this oral tradition was eventually put into words, into writing, and that Mishnah became part of the Talmud.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Mishnah isn't any better than the Talmud. This is all talking about the same kettle of fish, just in case there were some people that didn't know. So it's time to remember Jeremiah 6:16 and his counsel to the people when he said to ask for the old paths. This is one of my very favorite verses in Scripture. It means so much. Thus saith Yahuwah, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the old paths. That's the Torah, everyone, the old paths, the old ways. Where is the good way? And walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. Also remember that David would have written Psalms 81, 3 and 4, according to Moses and Torah. We're coming up to Psalms 81 again today, but you all know what it means. But everything was according to Torah. This was the old ways. This was what was to be preserved. Okay, Mario, can you help us out with slide number 39? These are quotes regarding Joseph and Psalms 81:3.
Psalms 81 tells us that Joseph instituted the Rosh Chodesh during his tenure as viceroy of Egypt. Joseph had the power to declare the decree, and the people of Egypt, principally the sons of Israel, were delighted to make the recognition of the new moon as a joyful feast. The testimony was to honor Joseph for what he did as a righteous deliverer, who in many ways prefigured the coming of Messiah of Israel and the redemption that he would ultimately bring. All of Yahuwah's feasts are a role play of eternal truths in his eternal purpose and keep his redemptive plan before us. What Joseph set in place as a testimony has been established as a statute for Israel, a law of Elohim of Jacob. This is Psalms 81, 3 through 4, the works of Philo on the life of Moses, Moses 2, that's chapter 40, part 222. Let's see what else. Joseph, the Jewish historian, also confirms this and defines it as when the sun was in Aries. Josephus Antiquities 3.20. Note again, Psalms 81:13 has no basis of Torah to blow the trumpet on the new moon.
Okay, so we're going to look at that a little bit on Psalms 81. We've done all this work already in previous sessions, but thanks a lot, Mario. And let's just continue on here with Moses before we look at some of the things on Psalms, because this is going to go together with Moses and Numbers 10:10, this Psalms 81. In Numbers 10:10, it is recorded that the trumpet is to be blown to sanctify the new moon as a feast day. That's what this quote is saying. At the beginnings of your months, and it's 2320 Kodesh, that is correct there. You shall offer a burnt offering to Yahweh. This is the burnt offering of each month throughout the months of the year. It shall be offered besides the continual burnt offering and its drink offering. That's from Numbers 28:11-15. The quote continues, Moses called the people to an assembly on the new moon and spoke to them according to the commandments that he had been given by Yahweh, exhorting them to faith and obedience. Moses called the people to an assembly on the new moon according to the commandments of Yahweh. I'm saying, really? He did that? Again, Numbers 10:10, it records new month. It does not say new moon. Okay. We have done this before, so this is a review slide from several PowerPoints ago between Psalms 81:3 and Numbers 10:10. We're going to scrutinize them. I wonder if you remember this. Psalm 81:3 says this, blow up the trumpet in the new month, because moon is not part of 2320 Kodesh. Blow up the trumpet in the new month. That is the renewal of the first day of Yahuwah's month. It says, in the time appointed, that is a full time, on our solemn feast day. And that feast day is 2282. It's talking about a festival. Psalms 81:3 has to follow the Torah instructions given by Moses. Why? This is written by King David. King David had to have a copy of the Torah. He had to govern according to the Torah. So whatever King David was doing, it had to be according to Moses and Torah. And he would not have been blowing the trumpet on the new moon. It would have been on the new month day. Let's compare it now to Numbers 10:10. Also, in the day of your gladness, I color-coded these, where you see the two greens. They're color-coded there, and the blue and the brownish colors. Also in the day of your gladness, that is the appointed fullness time, and in your solemn days, and in the beginnings of your months, that's the 2320, it's not a 3391 lunar month, in the beginnings of your months, that's when you blow with the trumpets. So between Numbers 10:10 and Psalms 81:3, there is not one mention of Yarok, which links to the moon. 3391, or Yarok, never qualifies any lunar phase to commence Yahuwah's feast months. And when we did this study several weeks ago, or even months, maybe by now, Psalm 81 and Numbers 10 absolutely do agree that the moon does not begin the month. Now, we've read some writings by Philo and Josephus, and we can now tell you that Josephus and Philo are not aligning with Torah, with the quotes that we have been going through. Okay, Tim, would you read this misquotes that is stated as a truth, and this is about Nehemiah. He was the last reformer. He brought back the third group of exiles from Babylon and found out that they were transgressing again and tried to get them back on track. But let's look at this quote on Nehemiah. Tim, do I have you?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Get your mic on.
Yeah, I'll explain later. This quote stated as truth. In the restoration of the law under Nehemiah, the new moons were reinstituted and kept from that time through to the destruction of the temple in 70 of the common era. Josephus records that they were kept during the entire temple period, and the high priest attended in the temple on the new moons and the Sabbaths. Now, this is a very, very interesting quote. About 80% of this quote is true. The new moons were reinstituted, and they did keep them in the time of the temple in the 70th Common Era. And Joseph did record this all happens. These things did happen. The high priest did attend the temple on the new moons and the Sabbaths. What is the misquote? What is the false part here? And this, if you go back to the Garden of Eden, it's exactly what Satan did in the Garden of Eden. He took truth and he added falsehood to it. And in this quote, the name of Nehemiah is the part that is false. The Nehemiah has been, or no, the last part of the quote has been added to the name Nehemiah to try and make it look official. Nehemiah did not reinstitute the new moons. He instituted a covenant calendar, exactly what is written in the Torah. But here we see part of the confusion, the contamination that has been inserted here to try and convince people and coerce them and brainwash them that the new moons are the way to go. And this is the things we need to spot. We need to be able to read this and pick this out and say, no, this is not correct. And we need to know why and be able to prove it from the scriptures.
Exactly, Tim. We haven't really done any studies on Nehemiah yet, especially about closing the gates, and maybe we'll do that someday. But the thing is that we need to be looking at these and understanding that these are kings and leaders and prophets and patriarchs that are conducting everything according to the Torah and the laws of Moses. So there is no way that Nehemiah would have been doing this. Absolutely not. Okay, Vivian, if you have your mic open, you're going to be doing slide 43 for us, and this is a misquote that is stated as a truth according to Solomon. What was Solomon doing? So let's take a peek and see what this is all about.
Okay, number 11, Moses commanded the keeping of the new moons. In 2 Chronicles 8, verse 12 and 13, Solomon said that it, as well as the other feasts, were an ordinance forever to Israel. 2 Chronicles 2, 3 and 4. Number 12, as sincere followers of Yahweh, of Yahweh's word, we should be observing them, new moons, now, and preparing ourselves as his bride, fully adorned in all her righteousness. The bride observing new moons? Really? Not Yeshua's bride.
Absolutely. And I would just like to know where they found in the Torah where Moses commanded the keeping of the new moons. They didn't really give a Torah verse there, did they? Okay, we're going back to Tim for slide 44.
We need to keep reiterating that statement, Charlene. Where is the commands from the Torah? That is such an important question. Okay, let's remember the following. Just because the rabbis can be quoted, and just because the Talmud has written instruction on rules following the crescent moon, this is hardly a reason to accept the new moons as the beginning of the month. Remember, Torah has priority, and most importantly, the crucifixion reveals the fulfillment. That is, the final say is on the crucifixion, not the rabbis or non-Jews of Revelation 2:9 and chapter 3, verse 9. The crucifixion has the final word, always.
Yeah. Okay, we want to look at a few more comments from some different Bible dictionaries. We will be looking at Unger's, the Illustrated Dictionary of the Bible, the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, and Fawcett's Bible Dictionary. We're going to have a little bit of insight into what these commentators have to say. And will they agree with Scripture, or will they support the Talmud and the moon month teachings? Now, many commentaries recognize the fact that Yahuwah's people were easily influenced by the pagans that worship the moon. So I would like you to take careful note of the history that's coming up. We'll start with New Unger's Bible Dictionary. The worship of the moon was extensively practiced by the nations of the East. In Lower Mesopotamia, Abraham's birthplace, was an important center of the worship of Sin, the moon god, as was Haran in Upper Mesopotamia. They had a temple dedicated to the moon in Haran, and that was where Abram and Terah immigrated. In Egypt, the moon was honored under the name of Isis, and it was one of the only two deities that commanded the reverence of all Egyptians. In Syria, the moon was represented by one of the Ashtaroth, surnamed Karnaim, from the horns of the crescent moon by which she was distinguished. There are indications of the early introduction into the countries adjacent to Palestine of a species of worship distinct from any that we have described, namely the direct homage of the heavenly bodies, sun, moon, and stars, characteristic of Sabianism. Then he goes on to say, the first notice we have of this is in Job 31, 26 to 28. We've gone over these verses many times in the moon studies. This is Job speaking. And do you remember that I have mentioned several times that I believe that Job is a Torah book? Job lived around the time of Abraham, around Genesis 12, 13, 14, 15 area. That, to me, would be considered Torah. This is what Job said. If I beheld the sun when it shined, or the moon walking in brightness, and my heart hath been secretly enticed, and that would be towards worship. He's saying this also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judge, for I would have denied the Elohim that is above. So Job is saying, if I would have done this, gone and gone after the sun and the moon and desiring them for worship, that he would be committing an iniquity. Very important scripture. Goes on to say, and it is observable that one warning of Moses, as found in Deuteronomy 4:19, is directed against this nature worship rather than against the form of moon worship that the Israelites must have witnessed in Egypt. At a later period, however, the worship of the moon in its grosser form of idol worship was introduced from Syria. In 2 Kings 23:5, we read that Josiah did away with those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, except for a very brief period under Josiah. Manasseh appears to have been the great patron of this form of idolatry, for he worshipped all the host of heaven, And from his reign down to the Babylonian captivity, moon worship continued to prevail among the Jews. And what was the date? This is about 624 BC. This is the date for 2 Kings 23. It's around 18 years before Babylon is going to be on the scene. And it says that moon worship continued to prevail among the Jews. Okay, Mario is going to have a little bit for us from the Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary and see what they have to say.
The moon had a special significance for the ancient Israelites. Their festival calendar, which began each month with the rising of the new moon, was known as the lunar calendar. The accurate recording of the new moon as it arrived each month was important because the moon governed the dates for other religious festivals. The prophet Amos condemned Israel's merchants for their impatience with the interruption to business caused by the festival of the new moon, as seen in Amos 8:4-6, and that's from about 787 BC. Speaking to the prophet Isaiah 1:13-15, Elohim condemned the formal but empty observances of the new moon festival, dated about 760 BC.
So I put the dates in there so that you can see that this moon worship and all of their activities around the moon was going on a long time. We don't have everything recorded in the Old Testament. Of course, we would never be able to read it all, but Yahuwah preserved what we absolutely had to know about. So, Walter, could you help us with this quote from International Standard Bible Encyclopedia?
Okay, the moon was very early worshipped by the nations of the Far East as a divinity or the representative of one or more deities. This personification and worship of the moon among the nations who were neighbors to Palestine was but part of an elaborate nature worship found among these people. Nor was this worship always separated from Palestine by geographical lines. It crept into the thought and customs of the Hebrews and in a sense affected their religious conceptions and ceremonies. They fell into the habit of making direct homage to the sun, moon, and stars. The actual worship of the moon and the idolatry consequent thereon seems to have touched the Hebrews, though this is disputed by some. It would seem difficult to explain 2 Kings 21:3, which was in 698 BC, upon any other supposition, and in 2 Kings 23:4-5 and 624 BC, we have a clear statement that Josiah put down the worship of the moon among the people and silenced the priest of this form of worship.
Thank you, Walter. And it is so important to understand that this is in the Old Testament. It is very, very obvious, but for many of us, we just haven't been reading it for what we should. But anyway, let's look at those scriptures from 2 Kings about Manasseh's abomination in comparison to Josiah's reformation. And we're just doing a review here. I didn't have room to write out everything. But Manasseh, he did that which was evil in the sight of Yahuwah. He was a king for 55 years. He built up the high places. This was for moon worship. And these were all the places that his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He reared up the altars for Baal. He made groves, just like King Ahab, to worship and serve all the host of heaven. And that's what Moses said exactly not to do, was to worship and serve the hosts of heaven. It also tells us in verse 4 that he built altars in the house of Yahuwah for all the host of heaven. In verse 6, it says he made his son pass through the fire. horrible, horrible things that they were doing. They were actually following the pagans in giving their children to the molten arms of Molech. He observed times, he used enchantments, he dealt with familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of Yahuwah, in fact, to provoke him to anger. And he also set a graven image of the grove that he had made right in the house of Yahuwah. Well, let's compare that to 2 Kings 23. This is for Josiah. He was a good king. He went up into the house of Yahuwah with all the inhabitants, the priests and the prophets, and he read to all of them the words of the book of the covenant found in the house of Yahweh. The king made a covenant before Yahuwah that he would perform the words of this covenant. And the king also commanded that all the vessels that were made for Baal, for the grove, and all the host of heaven, everything had to be destroyed and burned. Josiah went about and he put down the idolatrous priests that were ordained by the kings of Judah to burn incense unto Baal, the sun, the moon, planets, and to all the host of heaven in the high places of Judah. When you see high places, this is always about moon worship. And then he also went and he removed the image of the grove from the house of Yahuwah that Manasseh had put there to be burned and to stamp to small powder. So Josiah went in and he cleaned up. But this was a problem all the way through for Israel, but Judah was worse than Samaria and Israel. Just incredible, the history that we have in the Old Testament. Okay, for slide 51, Vivian is going to help us with Fawcett's Bible Dictionary. This has got some interesting information as well.
Yes, it says moon instead of the moon being regarded as a person and worshipped as it was by the surrounding nations. In Scripture, it is God's creature made for prophetic signs, agricultural seasons, days, and years. That's Psalm 104:19. The brightness of the moon in the east, guiding the travelers by night when the heat of the day is past, gives it a prominence which it has not with us. And that's Psalms 8:3. And then Psalms 89:37. However, the moon is not the faithful witness, but God is the witness, I guess it would be faithful witness, to his own oath, translated, and the witness of God in heaven is faithful. See also Psalm 89:35 refers to meaning Yahweh has sworn this truth by his holiness. And the last point, the moon, influences vegetable growth. That's in Deuteronomy 33, verse 14. Moons, namely its phases. Others explain months as the times of ripening fruits. Note, these are ordinances of the moon.
Thank you, Vivian. This is an excellent quote. Lots of really good information here from Fawcett's Bible Dictionary. So let's just look at some of these verses. I know some of you might not remember them, but Psalms 104:19, we're going to read that one along with 8:3. It says, he appointed the moon for seasons. Most of us have been taught that this is for Moedim seasons, the 4150 Moedims, but actually it is he appoints the moon for agricultural seasons. The sun knows his going down. And as per Fawcett, he tells us that the moon is not ordained for worship statutes. We can give him an A+ for that. For Psalms 8:3, David says, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. And on Fawcett's slide that's coming up next, I just want you to remember this verse. It is the Creator is so awesome that not one part of creation should ever receive his worship. That's meaning that the created should not receive the worship for the creator. Psalms 89:37. We're going to read verses 34, 35, and 36 first. But Psalms 89:37 is a key verse that a lot of feast keepers that are following the moon use it to establish that the moon is in charge with the month. But we need to read the context. Let's start at verse 34. My covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that is gone out of my lips. Once have I sworn by my holiness that I will not lie until David. That's because Yahuwah's witness is faithful. Take note of the context. It says, his seed, that's talking about David, David's seed shall endure forever, and David's throne shall endure, basically, as the sun before me. It's talking about David's throne, shall be established forever as the moon, and as a faithful witness in heaven. The it is not talking about the moon. It is talking about David's throne. It says, David's throne shall be established forever, just as the moon is established forever, and David's throne is the faithful witness in heaven. Psalms 89 context, the sun and the moon are enduring forever, just as David's throne is going to endure forever. So what I'm finding is the problem with this verse, 37, is people have not read the context from before it. So it's really easy to see, or to think that you see, that the moon is the faithful witness and the moon is in charge of the month. We've already done that in other studies. Okay, Tim, I would like you to finish up on Fawcett's quote from the Bible Dictionary on slide 53.
Okay. The moon was worshipped as Isis in Egypt, as Karnaim, two horns of Ashtoreth, wife of Baal, the king of heaven, the male and female symbolizing the generative powers of nature in Syria, as Sin, lord of the month in Babylon. Sabaism, from Sabah, the heavenly hosts, was the earliest of false worships. It appears in our pagan names: Sunday, Monday, Moon Day. Note, the quote continues with Job 31:26 and the problem of adoration of the moon. Josiah put down those who burned incense to the moon, 2 Kings 23:5, and that's around 624 BC. She was called Queen of Heaven, Jeremiah 7:18, though that may mean Venus or Urania. Cakes, which are Kawanium, round like her, which resembles the moon, discs were offered to her. So far from the moon being an object of worship, it, the moon, unconsciously worships its maker. Psalms 148:3 and 8, verse 3. The following verse speaks of the moon praising Yahuwah, not man praising and worshiping the moon. Psalms 148, verse 3. Praise ye him, sun and moon. Praise him, all ye stars of light.
Okay, thank you, Tim. The moon, oh the moon. Did you find that any of the commentators placed the moon in a position to receive sacred regard for Yahuwah's month commencement? I'm talking about the commentators that we just read. So, questions to ask and thoughts to ponder, because we've traveled through a lot of material and we need to know where we're going from here. So let's take a look. I'm saying we're concluding, but we're halfway through. We're halfway through this moon month study tonight, but we still have a lot of unanswered questions for the study. So let's ponder over some of them before we discover which no God has the authority, not only in the scriptures, but even with those desiring to worship Yahuwah today. I'd like to know what you think. Let's just take a little look at day 1 of creation. This first question is a little bit tricky, so just hang on. Is the first day of creation in the first month, which is Abib, of the festal year, or is the first day of creation in the 7th month of Tishri of the civil year? That might be a little bit of a confusing question, but I just want you to ponder it right now. And what would that information affect the following questions? Now, the reason I ask this question is because there is some interesting evidence that the actual creation of the earth basically is in Tishri, how Tishri, the root words of Tishri correspond with Bereshit, which means Genesis. Brad Scott does a teaching on that. So that's why I'm asking you this question. So let's keep going. Is the first day of creation also the first day of the month of the first year for this earth? And that's not a trick question. That's just a logical question. Is the first day of creation also the first day of the month of the first year for this earth? We've covered some of this material already. And I want you to remember that the lights are not brought forth until day 4 of creation week. And as we continue on, we're point number 4. This is still review material. The moon back then and now. Today, our moon has no light of its own. It's only reflected light from the sun. In fact, the moon never did have its own light when we consider some verses in Jeremiah, which we will do. But I just want to make a note here that the moon's up there and the planets, Jupiter and Saturn, we can see them in the sky when we go out there at night. But they don't have any light. They are reflecting light from the sun, just like the moon does. But let's consider the verse in Jeremiah 31:35, which we've said before. So says Jehovah, who gives the sun for a light by day, the laws of the moon, and the stars for a light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. Jehovah of hosts is his name. This is from the literal translation of the Holy Bible. It reads just a little bit different than the King James, but let's rearrange it the way that it would make more sense. The Hebrew poetry sometimes is a little bit different, but it goes like this. So says Jehovah, who gives the sun for a light by day and the stars for a light by night. So there's your lights for the day and the night. And then he gives the laws or the ordinances of the moon. This is 3394 Yarak, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. When the verse is organized this way, it makes sense, and it aligns with Genesis 1:16 perfectly, because the stars have nothing to do with the tides of the sea, and it is the moon that stabilizes the tidal activity. That's an ordinance. And also the verse is very clear about the two lights given to the earth, the sun being the greater light giver by day, and it's the stars that are the lesser light givers by night, and every single night they are up there in the sky. The moon is not in the sky every night. Half of the month it's up in the day sky. And also consider Psalms 19 verses 1 to 9. We won't be reading them tonight. But there is nothing that can be found in the scripture about the moon being a light giver at all. There's many ifs to consider. The lights are not found in the firmament until day 4 of creation. And then, what was it? Was the moon's phase at conjunction, like a dark moon? Was it a crescent moon, or was it a full moon by the time you get to Genesis 1, verses 14 to 18? This is something to think about. Number 2, those that believe the festal month was supposed to start with the moon, would that have been on the first day of creation or the 4th day of creation? And number 3, if the moon starts the first festal month on the 4th day of creation, what's going to happen to days 1, 2, and 3 of creation? Are they dead days and they just don't count anymore? Well, everybody should know which day of creation is actually the first day of the first festal month. At least it seems like it. And is the following thought logical to you? In the first week of creation, the moon began the first festal month on the 4th day. How could that be a Torah teaching? Does that make sense? Sometimes we need to just start asking some questions. Just start asking questions. Can creation solve the problem? The moon month issue seems to have a huge problem with the creation account. If the moon is to begin the festal months today, then doesn't the moon have to follow some kind of a pattern from the creation week in order to begin the creation festal month as well? Do you think Yahuwah's restoration of the lights in the sky on day 4 was deliberate? Why didn't he put the lights up there on day 3? And you should also remember the meaning of Psalms 104:30, where it says, "Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth." There's a alignment here with renewing. Something was renewed. I think we've done some of that in our Genesis Creation Week study. Is it even possible for day 4 to be the beginning of Yahuwah's first festal month, do you think? If not, then does that mean that the moon can never begin Yahuwah's festal months? Just some questions to think about. And what about some other arguments? There's so many people that are saying that the moon was in conjunction for days 1, 2, and 3. And then the crescent appeared on day 4 of creation. How could that happen when there were no visible lights in the firmament until day 4? Is that an argument they can use? Is it possible that a conjunction would last 3 full days on the first week of a perfect creation? Number 3, did the moon even have any phases in the first week? That's a question we need to ask as well. And how many people can give confirmation about how the festal month begins by using only Genesis chapter 1? And do they know that there are 2 types of months beginning in the first week of creation? Or do most of them have to default to Exodus 12? That's the Passover chapter of Moses. Do most people have to default to Exodus 12 and the idea of a full moon on the 14th day to prove the first festal month begins with the moon? That's what I'm finding is people are saying, no, Exodus 12, the 14th day, they just automatically assume the 14th day had a full moon. So I'd like Tim to help us out here with a couple of slides as we go through the next part of this study about Exodus 12.
It's the same old argument. Most say Exodus 12 supports the 14th day as having a full moon for Passover in the month of Abib. So the first day must be the new moon. How? Where's the scriptural proof for this? I haven't seen any scriptural proof for this, not at all. Exodus 12 is approximately 2,550 years after creation. Why would he wait until Exodus 12 to tell us when to begin the year? What about this thought? There's no need to look for a full moon at Passover because the moon has nothing to do with ushering in the fat month anyway. We do not find any reasoning in Scripture to tell us to look for the new moons. I think the slide is coming up here. It's a little on the slow side.
Yes, it is.
There we go. What about another thought? If the Passover of Exodus 12 had a bright full moon, then why did the people need the pillar of fire by night to guide their steps when they left Egypt for the next 3 days of travel into the wilderness? And the question is, would Yahuwah have a bright moon lit night and his pillar of fire too? There is a lot of light when traveling at night under the light of a full moon. Could it be in Exodus 12, the next night of Abib 15 really was also a very dark night because the moon was not full, or it was in full conjunction? A question that we need to think about. Would Yahuwah use a very dark night to emphasize his glory cloud? And we can do the alternative to that question. Would he have a bright moonlit night to bring out his glory cloud? It just does not seem like that would make sense to have a fully lit night with a moon and then bring out his glory cloud. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Full moon on the 14th day of the month? Where in the scriptures is there even one witness that the 14th day of the first festival month must be attended with a full moon? How are these conclusions found in the Torah? Is it possible that what most feast keepers have been taught about the moon is nothing but a strong pagan traditional belief handed down from the rabbis? I think it's highly possible, highly probable that that's exactly what it is. It's a traditional belief to coerce us into believing or into worshiping the moon.
Absolutely, Tim. We're finding that more and more. Did you have something else to say, Tim?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to take 3 slides here and just do a short review about how the moon did receive custody of the festal month. This is kind of from the last couple of presentations. It's a short review on moon worship or sacred regard for the moon along with sun worship, because it's had a huge impact on Yahuwah's people all through the ages, up to and including many feast calendars today. So let's see what we can find. Right, starting from the beginning. In the garden, the fallen Lucifer was given sacred regard in the garden. From the old word Luke, L-E-U-K, the name Lucifer connects to the moon through the words lunar and lunation. Some of you might remember that study. The moon is linked to worship of the moon goddess, especially in the Asherah, garden groves, and the high places. Today, sacred regard is being given to the moon through the moon month commencement on the feast calendars. It's hard for me to say that, everyone, but that is exactly what is happening. Then let's look at Adam to Noah. The patriarchs themselves remained relatively free from the worship of other gods. There is no witness in the scriptures that says the patriarchs were worshiping all the hosts of heaven. But after the flood, talks about Nimrod, where he became the first sun god, and Semiramis became the first moon goddess. And then we went up to Terah and Abraham. Terah took his family out of Ur of the Chaldees. That was an area of pagan sun god and moon goddess worship up the Gazoo, and they were asked to leave and to go to the land of Canaan. They did go up to Haran, and Terah decided to reside there. He felt that that was his Canaan, and there was a center dedicated to moon goddess worship up in that area, a huge, huge temple. Then we moved up to Terah and Laban. Both of them were attached to their teraphim moon images. Teraphim is the Hebrew word for images, and it was very likely a family business. You can see that connection there when you go through the moon PowerPoints. Then we went up to Abraham. This is Yah's patriarch that was called out from the moon worship to reside in Canaan. I believe that Abraham was the one that was called out because he was the one that kept himself completely free of idol worship. Shechem. At Shechem there was an oak tree. Shechem is a really important place, but right now this is where Jacob buries the family idols that Rachel stole from her father Laban. And again, the teraphim moon images link to Terah. Very interesting connections. Then we go down into Egypt, and a great multitude of the pagan Egyptians and their gods were down there. They left with Moses at Passover timing. And then we go up to Mount Sinai. Sacred regard was given to the pagan gods, including the moon goddess, through the altar and the golden calf in this moon worshiping area, the wilderness of Sin. Before Moses died, he gave very strict instructions in the chapters of Deuteronomy 4 and 17 to not look to and or worship the gods of the sun, the moon, the stars, and any of the host of heaven. He said, don't even look there, because if you do, you're going to be enticed to worship. They were in Egypt for a long time. And remember that the moon goddess altar is still standing today from that event when the golden calf was built. Then we move up 40 years later, and Joshua was commanded to destroy the moon-worshipping city of Jericho before they settled in Canaan. It was very important to clean out the land of moon worship. There was another Shechem commitment with Joshua where he encouraged the people to put away their family idols of sun and moon gods. He said, these are the gods that your fathers have worshipped. He did not say they were the gods of the pagans, although they were, but he said they were the gods that your fathers have worshipped. In the Old Testament history, Ashtoreth, the moon goddess worship, was a huge problem in the groves and the high places for both Israel and Judah. It is everywhere in the Old Testament. Just start reading. We get up to Hezekiah around 700 BC, where we have the sundial miracle. I think that Yahweh had to step in and do something, and this had a direct effect on moving the moon out of its 30-day orbit as Yahuwah tried to move his people away from pagan ways of moon goddess worship. That is the turning point. That is the kingpin in the whole calendar study. After that, we have 100 years go by, and Judah is finally marched off to Babylon. And the exiles incorporated the Babylonian sun and moon components into their Yahuwah's calendar when they came back from Babylon. And for most of them, sunset begins the day, and the crescent moon commences the month. Although there's many now that are using the full moon and they're using the conjunction, but anything to do with the moon. There's lots of feast calendars out there, something to do with the moon. And what's happening today? The majority of feast keepers today, or feast calendars, are honoring sunset for the day start. But even more serious, they are honoring a variety of moon sightings for the month start, when nothing is documented in Scripture for any of this behavior. The moon component in these feast calendars gives honor to Lucifer's moon goddess, and that's the long and the short of it. You've seen this slide before, and I had a hard time going through it the last time, but we're going to try it again. Are Christian churches today connected to pagan worship? We're talking about Christian churches, not just any denomination, but Christian. What about the Sunday Christians? They are honoring their day of worship on Sunday. Definitely that gives homage to the sun god from ages past. That has really got deep roots into paganism. What about Sabbath keepers, seventh-day Sabbath keepers? They are honoring the commencement of their worship days beginning with the sunset, the night before Sabbath. And friends, whether we like it or not, that is paying homage to the sun god from ages past. There's no way of getting out of it. And then we come to a third group of Sabbath keepers that are also feast keepers. In addition to honoring sunset, most also honor the moon for their festal month start. Thus they are paying homage to the goddess of the moon and also the sun god. And here's the serious question. Which of the three groups is most deceived by the Jewish mindset? Is it the Sunday Christians? Is it just the weekly Sabbath keepers? Or is it the Sabbath keepers that are also feast keepers? Which ones are most deceived? Just a little bit more on the moon component. Does the full moon have a connection to the crystal ball? And who is really being worshipped through that crystal ball? The moon goddess? And you just do a little bit of search on the internet and you will find all kinds of material that talks about the moon goddess, the crystal ball, pagan witchcraft, modern pagan witchcraft. Everything connected to the moon is about the goddess of the moon and paganism. Really, friends, who is being worshipped? When you think about, I looked outside tonight, it looks like we have a beautiful full moon up here. It is gorgeous, but not for worship. To remember our Creator. And remember part 4 of the the Moon study. If you haven't seen it, go look at it. Really, who is being worshipped? When you look at the words lunar, lunation, it connects to an old English word luke that connects to lux, and it connects to Lucifer. Who's being worshipped around this moon? There you can see a very small little crescent moon that's being sighted at sunset in that gold ring. I've only sighted it once in the 20 years of where I'm living right now. It's very difficult to find, but that's how Jews begin their festal months. They sight that little crescent moon, and then they say the next day is the first day of the new month, the new moon month. So the moon is part of their calendar, as with the pagans. Pagans watch the moon as well. And most of the feast keepers wander after the, I'll let you fill in the blanks. Everything revolves around the moon. A little bit on the sun component. Most people know that the sun has been worshipped by every pagan nation, including every aspect of imperial and papal Rome to this very day. And who is actually being worshipped? When you think about the Sunday churches and etc., it's about the sun. Well, Sabbath rest. Yet, according to the Jews, the sun governs the Sabbath commencement. And the sun is part of their calendar, just like it is with the pagans, especially Babylon. And what I like to say is most of the Sabbath keepers wander after who? Who are they wandering after? Is it after Yahuwah and the guidelines that he has set out in Covenant Torah? Yes, the Jews had, and they have, a Hebrew or questionable Hebrew calendar. However, unfortunately, the Jews' calendar is not Yahuwah's Hebrew covenant calendar. They can call it a Jewish calendar, yes it is, but it is not Yahuwah's covenant calendar. Their Jewish calendar simply hides the sun god and the moon goddess even today. This was a hard pill for me to swallow when I finally figured out what was going on. We're back to these familiar slides. Do the patterns of history repeat from the Old Testament up to today? And I think it's time to firmly answer this question. Which no god is going to gain the authority? Will it be the sun god? Or do you think the god that gains the authority is the moon goddess that started with Semiramis? Will the scriptures offer any clues to us? And we've done a lot of work in these scriptures, so this is just a very short summary right now. This is a review slide that we had many lessons ago. I think you might remember it. I went and I researched everything that I could find in the Old Testament about no God worship. And the ones that I have listed here in green, these are especially pertaining to Baal or Balaam. The ones that are in pink are to the moon goddess. The ones that are in black, it didn't say. It was just images, graven images, molten images. It didn't specify if it was Baal or Ashtoreth. Actually, Moloch could be considered a Baal. Sun, moon, and host of heaven, these are verses that have just host of heaven, verses that said, 6 verses with no gods, 10 verses with thy gods, 34 with their gods. So I could only pick out the ones that I knew for sure were gods for Baal and gods for Ashtoreth. Altogether, it's 887 references. I know it doesn't look like it, but I've added it many times. And this is just from, just a informal study. It isn't an exhaustive one, But when you list out these phrases and it comes to 887, they all link to pagan worship. And what I did was I took the Old Testament history books. I did not include Moses' books, okay, because there isn't really too much in there about his people worshiping pagan gods except for at Mount Sinai. But out of the Old Testament history books, there are 549 chapters. And I just did the math. You have about an average apostasy of mention of no gods 15 times in about every 10 chapters. Just an average. You can do your own study. So sun gods add up to about 87 and moon gods add up to about 129 for a total of 216. So we're going to use these figures right here for the next slide, because it is time to expose the no God in authority. If you have a record of 216 no gods, the Old Testament is entries for the sun god worship of Baal or Balaam, which is just plural for Baal, is equal to 87, and you do the math, it comes to about 40%. When you do the math for the moon goddess worship of Ashtoreth, queen of heaven, in the high places in the groves, it's around 129 of what I found, and the math comes out to 60%. It is time to expose the no God in authority. I believe that the Old Testament shows us that the moon goddess has greater authority over the sun god, and it's still the same today. Nothing has changed. Have you heard that? Nothing is new under the sun. I believe that the moon has been exposed through this study, but is it a lunar deception, a lunatic authority, or is it both? And how dangerous is it? We are commissioned to walk in the light. And I really do appreciate Ephesians 5, verses 8 and 11, because it says, "For you were once in darkness, but now you are light in Yahuwah. Walk as children of light. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them." You can use this verse for many, many different topics, secret societies and all kinds of things. But when we're talking about calendar, we want to expose the darkness in calendar, because there is no moon in Yahuwah's calendar. And I think it's time for many of us to just let that moon go. Why? Because that moon is a burden. It comes straight from paganism, and it has no scriptural endorsement whatsoever. And unfortunately, Judah preserved the moon and the moon goddess for many people today. I just wonder if Tim has any comments for this slide before we go on to the next slide.
Not at the moment, Charlene.
Okay, I just thought I would give you a chance because I don't like to cut people off. But anyway, let's just keep trucking. We're coming back to these questions again because they should have answers. Where did the sun and the moon worship really begin? Were the patriarchs between Adam and Noah responsible for promoting worship of no gods? I say absolutely not. Number 3, do the sun god and the moon goddess represent the major no gods, or are there other more important pagan gods? I say yes, they are the major no gods. If the sighting of the sun and the moon are part of a worship calendar, I believe that action is regarded as worship. If sacred regard and allegiance of any kind is given to the sun and the moon, is it classed as worship? I believe, according to Moses and his instructions, yes it is. Did this study conclude which no god is more deceptive in the festal calendar, the sun god or the moon goddess? I'd like to hear your comments on that when we have a chance. And the Old Testament, to me, indicates that the moon goddess had much more sway and authority over Yahuwah's people. You surprised? I was. I thought that when I did this study, I would find it was the Baals. I thought it was the sun god that had the sway over Yahuwah's people. It wasn't. It was the moon. Hands down. This question should not have to be asked anymore. When is the new moon day? I remember we used to ask, when is the new moon day? We couldn't find it. We couldn't cite the crescent moon. We had to depend on the internet or somebody to send us an email. We couldn't figure out which was the new month day according to the moon. But guess what? We don't have to ask this question anymore. That's done and over with. So a new thought for a covenant calendar. Well, you know what? I think it's found right in Psalms 90, verse 12. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. And you know what that means to me? David is saying, learn to count. All you have to do is know how to count out Yahuwah's calendar. Find the first day of the year and start counting 1 to 30. This is a slide for audience participation. We may take this over until after the recording is done, but there is a little quote here that I would like you to take note of from Arthur Schopenhauer, I guess, Schopenhauer. All truth passes through 3 stages. Here's the first stage. First, truth is ridiculed. And secondly, truth is violently opposed. First it's ridiculed, and then it's violently opposed. And then the third thing, it is finally accepted as being self-evident. And I just hope that you're finding that it's really self-evident that the moon is not part of Yahuwah's calendar. So what are your thoughts on the moon goddess having priority in most feast calendars? And did Judah hide their no gods in their calendar? They hid them somewhere. What did they do with them? And how are you going to answer calendar accusers? You will come up to this if you are wanting to share this information. I say the answers are only found in the Word of Yahuwah, and with a complete covenant calendar study, I think everyone should be able to say with King David in Psalms 119, there's 2 verses that I picked out. Verse 100, I understand more than the ancients, because I study and keep the covenant precepts. And verse 42, so shall I have wherewith to answer him that approacheth me, for I trust in thy word. That is wonderful counsel from King David. And of course, Psalms 119, verse 105, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Forever, O Yahuwah, thy word is settled in heaven. And I just have a question. Will you join Yahusha and the great patriarchs of Yahuwah to restore covenant calendar? Because it's time. Friends, it is time that we leave doubt behind. And as we're coming up to the closing up of this study tonight, there are so many people that are searching for Yahuwah's covenant calendar. There's a lot of confusion out there with calendars, and it's hot. It's very controversial. And I believe that the complete moon month study shows beyond a shadow of any doubt that the moon is absolutely not involved with the calculation for the month commencement of Yahuwah's annual feasts and festivals. The moon month is connected to the agricultural ordinances, and that means that we get a blessing on this earth, both the earth and mankind, and that's a very important mandate for us to have food and all kinds of good things. And you know, Satan's going to use every possible method to derail our sacred regard and redirect it for the moon where it does not belong. And we're not going to do that anymore. But we're coming up to the end, and I would like Tim to finish up here with the last of these slides. And he has some really interesting things to tell you.
Israel and Judah persistently gravitate toward the pagan feasts over Yahuwah's worship statutes. Their allegiance was continuously surrendered to a created, that being the moon. Sadly, their allegiance was never delivered permanently to their creator. It was their sacred regard for the moon, the goddess, that affected their feast calendar the most, very nearly separating them from Yahuwah completely. You'll see that in Isaiah 1, verse 15. The moon goddess is still given sacred regard today by having the authority to appoint the moon as the commencement of the festival month or a weekly Sabbath. That should be nothing new under the sun. Definitely, there is no doubt the sunset day start is also a very serious matter. But what about the commencement of the Tekufa in Genesis 1? Has anybody seen this written in Genesis 1? And does anybody know about the year that was written in Genesis 1? The covenant calendar study is now ready to move forward. And what is going to be next? What's the next study that's coming up? Creation gives us the first witness of the Tekufa for covenant calendar. And it's going to surprise you where it's written. But it's very, very, very clear. It troubled me for a number of years. How come I haven't seen it written in Genesis, in the Torah? Well, it's there. And it's written very, very many, many times. It's just that we haven't looked at it. We've been taught to look over it. And the questions I want to consider for this next study that's going to be coming up: does Yahuwah operate on a year format that must be continuously recalculated, readjusted, and manipulated according to man's belief system? If you remember those quotes that we read from the Talmud, they removed the visual citing and they inserted their hidden agenda on how to calculate it. And it's for a reason. Man's lunar calendar is fully manipulated by man, and that's all. They have admitted that. It's documented. Number 2 question: does Yahuwah operate on an established year with a set pattern that duplicates automatically from within itself? Number 3: does this same year format reveal the format established at creation, where identities procreated by the seed within itself produce after like kind? And there again, we see the pattern after pattern after pattern set in the scriptures. And I'm asking you, was that pattern set at creation? Would this type of format accurately detail eternity? When this description that we're going to find, and I'm going to tell you right now, in what I have found and what I'm solidly convinced of, this format, this pattern that we have seen established in Genesis 1, that details eternity. And it's once you see it, it's just going to be absolutely astounding how that this is detailed all throughout Scripture. This word in Scripture is used, it's around 800 times. And it details eternity. It's just absolutely astounding. And I hope that you will join the next study to find out. I believe it's on January 5. Is that correct, Charlene?
Well, that's what we're aiming for. But you know what? I know there's some people that have already seen your study, Tim, and I just had an email or a phone call just this week that said, when is Tim giving that study? We can't wait for it. We've got to see it again. So it's going to be really exciting. But anyway, it sounds to me like you're talking about we can know the end from the beginning and vice versa. So I guess we're going back to Genesis 1 to know the end from the beginning. That sounds really exciting. And that's the end of our presentation. Of course, if you have any questions or comments or whatever, you can certainly contact myself or Tim at studythecalendar.com. And we would love to have you. And we thank you very much, and especially for the participants that we're sharing tonight. We appreciate their help as well. There you go. We're all done. We made it. There's no more moon studies.
Wow.
Thank you to those of you that are watching us on YouTube. We're glad that you're here. We hope that you were blessed. Once again, if you'd like to be part of the Covenant Calendar Club, visit studythecalendar.com on the resource page and join the group. I'm sure there's some questions. Let's open it up for some questions, shall we? That's great. Thank you, Charlene. Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charlene.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And I want to take just a second to thank Abba for our technical protection that we had today. In spite of you guys' weather and what you had, it seemed to run really smooth. So thank you for watching over us and allowing us to finish this study. That was great. Other questions about the study? Julia.
I have
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia. You finish after that.
No, I was just going to say that Belinda is asking a question in the group. Did anyone see her question in the chat?
Are you talking about the 12-hour Sabbath? I did send a little answer.
Yes, it was
At
answered.
least that was the question.
Yes,
yeah.
it was answered.
Yeah, I just gave a very short answer. We don't have a formal study ready to go, but we probably will have to do that, Tim, on a 12 or 24-hour Sabbath. But Tim and I do not teach a 12-hour Sabbath. I know there's lots of dawn keepers that do that, and I can't understand that when they were sunset keepers, they had no problem keeping a 24-hour Sabbath, but as soon as they became a dawn keeper, for some unknown reason, 12 hours went out the window. I haven't seen anybody study for this, but no, we do not. We feel that the patterns in the creation week are very, very strong. Every single day got 24 hours, and I don't live very far north. But where I live, the sunset here is about 20 to 4 in the winter time, and our sunrise is around 8:30, 9 o'clock. So that means if I'm going with the daylight time of the Sabbath is my Sabbath, I get maybe 6.5 hours, and I'm saying, no thanks, I worked really hard this week, and I am not taking a 6-hour Sabbath. The further north you go, the worse it gets in the wintertime. And don't tell me it averages out with the summer, because I don't go with that. That's not logic to me. That's not the way Yahuwah works. But the thing is that what we have found, and I don't know, maybe others can comment, when we switched from sunset to the morning Sabbath, we found that we were getting a much better rest on Sabbath night, because as soon as the sun went down, we weren't working like we were always before. But we also found that when we were coming up to the twilight of the end of the day, that was some of the most beautiful hours of our Sabbath, and our study goes right clear until we go to bed, whether it's 9, 10, or 11 o'clock at night. Those dark hours of our Sabbath are some of the most precious that we've had all day with Yahuwah, and now we're just sort of getting filled up, and I know too many that have switched over to, as soon as it gets dark, they just are doing whatever they want. And I really feel that they're missing an incredible blessing. And I don't know, for me, and I think I'm speaking for Tim as well, that a 24-hour Sabbath is the only way that we will ever go. We won't discount it, not 1 minute. So others can comment. We'd be happy to hear.
I wanted to thank Julia for bringing that out, that Belinda had that question in the chat. I can't see the chats. Belinda, did you get the question answered? And before we move on to Joy, is there anyone else that wanted to address that question about a 12-hour versus 24? Anyone else have a comment in there?
Yeah, this is Belinda. You answered my question. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Okay.
I just wanted to say that I loved the answer. I love the fact of, yes, I want 24 hours of rest from my 6 days of work. Hello.
That's great too. Yeah, I think too, if anybody spends some time reading Exodus 16 slowly and just enjoy that chapter about a half a dozen times, I mean, it's clear that in the evening, whatever you had collected that day that you saved up over the night of the 6th day would still be good tomorrow, the next morning at the beginning of the Sabbath, without stinking. If you did that any other day of the week, you'd wake up to some stinky, wormy manna. But just that alone, I think, makes it pretty clear it's a 24-hour day Shabbat. And who wouldn't want to spend, every hour of every day with Abba, right? Okay, Joy, I think you were next.
Yeah.
Oh,
I have a question.
Sean,
When do we start?
what's that?
When do we start the Sabbath?
At dawn in the morning, early in the morning.
Early in the morning.
From morning to morning. You can ask pretty much any child on the planet, when does the day begin? And they'll give you the right answer. They'll say, well, in the morning when I wake up. That's just a standard answer for, little boys and little girls. So we want to be like children.
I'm going to be
When the sun
doing
gets
a
up.
study that addresses that, Catherine. It addresses it very, very well. It'll be coming up in the new year sometime. It's that Matthew 28, end of the Sabbath study. It goes through the crucifixion. And it's not even possible that it could start at sunset. If you go onto our website, thestudyofthecalendar.com, you'll see the study, The Crucifixion According to John. That's another one that will help you understand. I believe there's the one that goes with that is Roman Reckoning, and that will help you understand things in the crucifixion also. It's quite important to understand that really well.
Okay.
Thank you, Catherine. Did you want to add anything else?
I believe when you start from the beginning, it will help you. But when you come in the middle, there are some challenges. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that you understand it better because she started at the beginning and you were able to go through it? Or are you saying that it's a little challenging starting in the middle?
A little challenging study in the middle. Because
Right.
if you start, when you start doing it at the beginning, you'll be able to follow how it's going. But when you come later on, it's like you've started in the middle, so you are not up to where you're supposed to be.
Okay, so if you don't mind me asking, I don't want to, mess up your thought, okay, or anybody else. Where would you say that the beginning would be a good place to start? Where would be a good beginning?
Like right now, I was saying April is the first month, right? So we have to count from April, and then like from April, the months. April is the first month.
Okay, so I'm saying I'm hearing April because we have to live in this Gregorian calendar thing, right? So so it's the first day after the vernal equinox, after the spring equinox is day 1, which is like the end of March, and it leads into April. So yeah, April would be a part of the first month. But so is that?
I have to go through the studies. I
Okay.
have to go through the studies, and then yeah.
Okay, so for you it would be the beginning of the month would be the beginning.
Yes.
Okay. I just want, because there's some people, when does the day begin? That would be the beginning. So, I'm just wondering if, where your beginning is.
What we have found, Mario, is that if people don't understand the start of the day, it's brutally difficult to understand the year. We found that it's pretty well vital to understand the start of the day first. When you understand the start of the day, then the year falls in succession. And that's actually how Yahuwah did it in Genesis 1. He outlined the day first, and then comes the year. And I think there's a reason for it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, we did that right in our very, very first study. We showed that understanding the word evening is the actual foundation of the whole calendar study, is the word evening. Everything stems on the word evening. And what Tim and I discovered